Ladies and gentlemen, the tiny DevOps guy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Tiny DevOps. The new year is here, and we decided to do an episode. I've invited back my friend Amando to talk about definitions. So we're gonna try to start 2022 off with some clear definitions on some confusing topics. So welcome back, Amando. Thanks for joining me. I'm excited to do this episode because our industry is so full of crazy and confusing buzzwords, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of some of these. We haven't actually discussed our own definitions before, so it's possible that we will find that there's more confusion than we realize, and we don't even agree on something here. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea, to see what happens here. And great to be here again. Let's see how it goes. All right.
Great. So I reached out to my LinkedIn network a few weeks ago, and I told them we were preparing to do this episode, and I asked for some suggestions. I said, what terms in software development and in IT do you think are most often misunderstood? And we got some great suggestions. So we're going to start through that list here. The first one, since we're talking, this is a DevOps show, I think we should just tackle that one right away. The term DevOps. Do you want to start this one off since you're my guest? Tell me what you think DevOps actually means.
I mean, you host Tiny DevOps, so I think you should start.
You think I should start?
Define your own podcast title.
So for me, the definition of DevOps really goes back to 2009, when John Allspaw and Paul Hammond gave their seminal presentation. It's available on YouTube, called 10 plus deploys per day. And they laid out a concept which we now call continuous deployment or continuous delivery. At the time, it was pretty new and revolutionary. And almost immediately after they gave their presentation, the first DevOps Days conference was organized and held a few months later on the same topics. So to me, that talk is really important. Understanding that talk is important to understand what DevOps means. And the basic point they make in that talk is that sort of the traditional mindset between dev and ops is that developers' goal is to push as many changes as fast as possible into production because customers want that. And operations goal, these white-haired old guys who just say no all the time, their goal is to prevent any changes from ever happening to production because they want things to be stable. So the point of this presentation was that this is the wrong way to look at things. And actually, the goal of both dev and ops is to enable the business to serve customers. So to me, DevOps is aligning the goals of dev and ops to serve customers. And that can be done in many different ways. The tools you use are interesting and useful, but they don't make DevOps. So DevOps this is where it gets into that really fuzzy area where people say things like DevOps is a mindset, because it kind of is. But that's also not a very useful statement by itself, right? You have to explain the rest of the context. So I usually simplify when I'm talking about this to say DevOps is cooperation, and that's an obvious oversimplification, but I think it gets us in the right direction. If you can replace the word cooperation, or I'm sorry, if you can take a sentence that says DevOps and replace it with cooperation, and it makes sense, you're probably on the right track. If it doesn't make sense, like you're talking about a DevOps team, and you replace that and now it's a cooperations team, that doesn't make sense. So that's why I like to make that oversimplification. That's my answer to what DevOps is. Please disagree with me if you want to.
That's a very interesting one. I mean, if I got a €1 for every time I applied for a job for a DevOps team, I'd have like €5, which isn't much, but still more than you'd expect. And I'm not totally sure if the irony is lost on these people, but yeah, I feel that DevOps, the term DevOps, the whole thing just comes from the need to have a term to describe that thing that I guess you call cooperation, which is totally right. Like, I mean, at Trivago, I was part of the first team that actually used DevOps, and I guess it created some good things for the business, also because suddenly you get one person doing the job of two, So that's always good, less expenditure. And you get more ownership. Like I'm more likely to watch over my code so I don't break production, because if production does break, guess who's fixing it?
Yeah.
So it does a little bit of that. It creates more ownership is not the actual word, but it is one of the words I want to use, but it's not the other word I want to use. But
so many words to choose from.
exactly, yeah. And with so many languages in my head, English is not even my my instinct anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I definitely created more of that, and cooperation, yes.
Okay.
And I've seen some of your LinkedIn posts where suddenly people oh yeah, security. Oh, sorry. Well, you must have been talking about DevSecOps. So it's also about having terms that people want terms to describe things, and then you come up with these terms, and none of them really make sense. It's just people want to name things, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem per se with DevSecOps if it provides value to your context. You know, if somebody suddenly is now thinking about security more because they're using that term, okay, great, use the term. But if you put everything that possibly could fit under that umbrella together, you're going to end up with a word that's longer than Mary Poppins' favorite word. You know, it's going to be ridiculous. So I just use the term DevOps to encompass biz, dev, sec, QA, AI, whatever ops. It's the same philosophy, the same principle of aligning goals to achieve the business outcomes.
Yeah, I like your thing of replacing the word with collaboration or cooperation, and if it makes sense, then you're probably going the right way. Yeah. That's a pretty interesting way of looking at it. It's incredibly simplistic, but I was trying to think of one where it wasn't accurate. And,
yeah. All right, that's the challenge for listeners. If you can find a place where replacing DevOps with collaboration or cooperation breaks things, send me a note, and I'd love to hear about it. So I admit that it is oversimplified. It's DevOps is more than just that, but I think it points people in the right direction if they make that change.
Yeah, especially problem statements like we need more DevOps, we need more collaboration.
There we go. Yeah. All right, have we beat that horse? Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you on this one. We have a similar philosophy in this part anyway, so yeah, maybe I'll change my mind later on. We'll see.
Okay. We'll do that for the intro to 2023 episode. We'll change our definitions again. Let's move on to another big hairy one, Agile. This one might even be more misunderstood than DevOps, and DevOps is pretty darn misunderstood. So yeah, it's your turn to go first. Tell me what you think Agile means.
I don't have the actual textbook definition, what anybody calls it, but to me, Agile is something that is fast, whether it's fast to break or fast to fix. Hopefully both. Mm-hmm. Anything that is not fast or as fast as it could be is less agile than optimal, if you can use it as an adjective.
So I just looked it up. The dictionary says that agile is the ability to move quickly and easily.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right on target there. I actually learned just yesterday that when they were on their ski resort writing the Agile manifesto, the word that they were using on that weekend wasn't agile. They were, of course, internally they were deciding what to call it and everything, but their working title or their working concept was the word light, not agile. Nice. So they were working for light software development, but I guess they thought that didn't have the catchy ring to it, and maybe they thought it would be even more misunderstood because light can mean so many things, from a color to physical light to less fat in your mayonnaise or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, but I like that context because it has the same connotation about the ability to move quickly and easily. You know, you're not weighed down by procedures and extra whatever stuff you don't need.
You have the space to adapt to the situation instead of. Also, like, I mean, one thing that always got me about the Agile Manifesto and people yelling it within corporations, it's like. People and interactions over processes and tools, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And then the first thing is like, here's this tool every single time.
Yeah. Agile, it's kind of become a religion in maybe in good ways, but definitely in bad ways too. I mean, I see people trying to beat each other up over the head with the Agile Bible, if you will. And sort of trying to shove it down people's throats. You have to be agile. You're not doing it my way. And I like to.
And I mean, so perhaps sometimes it is agile to not be agile.
That's kind of the paradox, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of,
And
I don't want to get too philosophical or too religious here, but it does. I think there's a strong parallel between the idea of trying to force agility on somebody, and the idea of trying to force somebody to believe in your religion. That you can't do either one. It doesn't make sense. It violates its own principles in doing so.
Exactly. Like, not all zealots are religious purely and simply by the religion we know. So yeah, there's a lot of agile zealots walking around.
Definitely are. I like to go back to the Agile Manifesto. I don't think it's a perfect document, but I think it's a good document. There are some parts of it that are somewhat dated, but if we take it in the context of when it was written, and what the computers had the capability to do at the time, so I'm thinking specifically of the idea that it says that we should aim to release. I think in the principles it talks about we should release on the order of weeks or months with a preference for weeks. I think if they were to write that now, they would say with a preference towards minutes.
Oh yeah.
In 2000, releasing, running your entire test suite and releasing the instant you hit merge wasn't feasible. It is now. So I don't think that was meant to be a lower bound. I think, but if we look at the principle of it, so that's one example, and there aren't many, but that's one example where I think that the manifesto is somewhat dated, but the principles are still sound. As long as we can look past the written word to what it's trying to communicate to us, I think it's very valuable. And when you do that, you get this sense of moving quickly and easily that so many zealots tend to forget about.
Yeah, I mean, this one is also relatively simple. So I don't know, because this would be actually more interesting with someone that doesn't really know these terms, like someone from the business side that maybe has a PMP course and hasn't really looked into things that much.
That's a good point.
Could be interesting. Yeah. Because also, like, another thing with definitions and terms and stuff is that even if we disagree, it doesn't matter because we're not working together. So
fair enough. Yeah, it's much more important that your PO agrees with, well, at least understands what you mean.
Exactly.
Than that I understand what you mean. Yeah, exactly.
So some sort of internal document of definitions makes more sense than everyone having to agree on everything worldwide, because it doesn't matter if I agree with someone on LinkedIn whether X means Y, or it doesn't matter. As long as the people that I work with daily and collaborate with daily both say the same things with the same words, that's good enough.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
So perhaps we can move on to the next one.
Yes. MVP.
Yeah, I know you have some strong views on this one.
I do.
Yeah.
I see this word used incorrectly all the time.
It's a really MVP. It's a really MVP thing to use it wrong all the time.
I guess so. Now, I mean, an argument can be made that are you using it wrong if the people you talk to understand what you're talking about, and that's fine.
It's pretty easy to quantify. I mean, whichever basketball player brings in the most money is the MVP.
There you go. Yeah, but value is in the eye of the beholder.
Sure, yeah, but there's a monetary value attached to it.
But what is that money worth? No,
that's
detracting too far. So
my NFT.
To be clear, we're talking about an MVP product. The idea that you're building an MVP, and for this one, I think it's important to recognize where the term comes from. So MVP, I guess I should have said this already, stands for minimum viable product, right? It's not a most valuable player or whatever. Those are fun too. So it's minimum viable product, and it's important to understand where the term comes from if you want to understand what it means. Or at least what it used to mean, what it meant originally. A lot of people take MVP to mean simply a beta version or an alpha version of a product. That we're going to build a first version of a product. It'll take 6 months, and we're going to get it in front of some customers, and we're going to iterate from there. There's nothing wrong with that approach per se, but that's not an MVP as it was originally defined. And the term was made popular by Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. And he gives examples. The best known example, I think, is Zappos, the online shoe retailer that's been, I think, bought by Amazon since then. But the founder of Zappos when he had the idea to sell shoes online, it was a very non-obvious idea. I don't remember when this was, late 90s, I suppose. The idea of buying things online was already new, and the idea of buying something so personal as a pair of shoes that might not fit, and it might not feel quite right, even if it's the right number. That was a very unsure bet at the time. So rather than spending 6 months to build a beta and trying to get 1,000 customers and investing in a bunch of shoe inventory, he went to his local shoe store, took some photographs with a digital camera of shoes, put them on a website, and then once he sold a pair of shoes, then he would go buy the shoes that he had just sold and then ship them to the customer at a loss. So this is, when you think about this, that at a loss, I think, is a really important thing to remember here, the MVP. The goal of an MVP is not to have 1 million customers. It's not even to impress 50 customers. The point is to learn as quickly as you can about your business idea to see if it's viable. Mm-hmm. And so that's what he did. He was, I mean, when you think about the fact that he was doing this at a loss, it might make alarm bells go off in people's heads. Like, why would you do that? You can't make money that way. But consider the alternative, which was probably to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building a website versus losing $10 a pop on selling some shoes at a loss.
Yeah, and it's also an incentive for people to do something that was not really normal to do at a time, which is buying shoes online. So if people see a $10, $20 difference from the store price, they might give it a shot, I suppose. So you might end up with more data than otherwise.
Yeah. So that's what an MVP is. It's the minimum product you can do to validate your business idea.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, not necessarily a tech one.
Right.
Like, I mean, we're building an MVP now internally, and one of the investors wanted to have a look over my architecture design and everything. I was like, I think an architecture design is precocious for an MVP.
Exactly.
So it's going to be a Symfony application on the VPS, and he loved it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
In some conversations, I've had people bring up a related concept, which is a proof of concept, which is you could kind of think of as kind of an MVP for technical stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, except there you actually want to prove that your technical idea works, not that the business idea works. So they serve similar purposes, but one is business focused and one is tech focused, more or less.
But this is an interesting thing for the definition. Like whatever an MVP is, it's more of a business first thing than, I mean, Eric Ries's Lean Startup, that's where it came from. It didn't come from a technical book.
Right.
So, yeah, and I see a lot of developers just going way too far with MVPs. Like, if it takes you a month to build, it's maybe not an MVP.
Right. Yeah, and an MVP could be a landing page for a product that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah,
I mean, if I'm gonna build a course on how to launch Kubernetes on your Raspberry Pi or something, maybe I don't know if everybody wants to do that, and so I don't want to spend all the hours it would take to write the script and whatever. So I'll just put up a landing page. Here, for $100, you can buy this course, and if anybody clicks on it, it says, "Sorry, this isn't ready yet, but I'll email you when it is," or whatever. You don't even have to take money. Just see who clicks on the button.
Yeah, I mean, at one point I wanted to see if having written a book would make any difference in how employable I was. So I just put up a fake book cover on my website and a link to download it. And it didn't change anything, but of course the N was the N number was very small, so it could have made a difference. But that's that kind of stuff. Like you have to be super lazy for it. If you're thinking too far, too much, it's probably not an MVP. And like also you've sent some emails on your newsletter, the humans a Turing complete thing. Some are, but. But yeah, like a lot of manual work for an MVP is okay. And I'm glad that the team I'm working with, they're aware of this. So they know that in the beginning, like maybe some stuff will be on a Google Sheet and you're going to have to do it manually. And they're perfectly aware that that's the case. So that's good. But a lot of people from the start, I mean, I've done the same mistake as well. Like, so yeah. Manual work is okay for an MVP. It doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be super complex. Isn't a proof of concept, because if you're trying to prove that something works technically, that's not the MVP.
Right.
The MVP is whether someone will pay you for this.
Exactly.
And this can be done by Mechanical Turk people.
I recently heard a podcast where somebody was talking. They were making the case that their product could not have had an MVP because their product was automation based. And I was listening to the podcast thinking, you don't understand an MVP.
Or automation.
Or automation. But I mean, I think their product was rebuilding Kubernetes clusters or something. It was something fairly technically involved that needed to be automated. But my thought was your MVP should validate whether customers want to pay for this, not whether you can do the thing.
A landing page and a checkout button.
A landing page would work. You could even say, for our MVP, we will deploy your Kubernetes for you, but it takes 8 hours, and we're going to do it manually with keyboards and have 6 people in India doing it for you. That could be an MVP too. And over time, we're going to automate it so it's faster. So but this person who just hadn't thought of it from that angle, and that's fine. Maybe they didn't need that. I don't know. But saying you can't do an MVP probably means you don't understand what an MVP means.
Could be, but I mean, like, for example, a lot of the in the startup place where I am, there's a lot of people that they've been going like a year now without a product. They're pre-product, but they have money in the bank. They have things going on, and their MVP was essentially a pitch deck.
Yeah. Well,
to an extent, because
you're
getting money from customers is one thing, getting money from investors is another. So it's two different things going on there.
Yeah, and there's of course different business models, and I don't know that an MVP is appropriate for all business models or all cases. Mm-hmm. I mean, an MVP is most useful, I think, when you have a completely untested market idea, like selling shoes online for the first time. If I was going to start selling shoes online right now, I probably wouldn't do an MVP, or at least not at that level. It would be very different. It would be more of a POC. Then it's a question of, do I have a niche that's small enough to make money, or do I have enough billions to invest to start competing with Zappos or something like that? Yeah, but it's a very different question I need to answer than, will people buy shoes online?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because now you know that they will, so it's not necessarily it's not MVP stage. Like probably can even get shoe store themes for Shopify for free if you want.
Yeah.
So, but it's an interesting one. So MVP, something you have to be lazy to get one done.
Pretty much, yeah.
A lot of stuff is scrapped. A lot of stuff might be manual. A lot of stuff might not even be there. I mean, I remember at one point I was working for this online store, and they wanted to test. They wanted to test something. I don't remember what it was. And my suggestion for the MVP was just having the button on the page and seeing if people actually clicked it to see if they would actually use it. Yeah. And because if you create a new feature and it's just hidden behind some link somewhere, you don't even know if people are going to click that link.
Right.
So you're not even sure if you can provide the value to the customer if they're going to find it organically. So you should test that before you develop anything. And yeah.
So next on the list we have API. Now, this is an interesting one because it almost has a technical definition. But I guess MVP is also an acronym that's fairly specific. But what do you think an API is?
I think the actual term is application programming interface.
Yeah.
But it's it's communication, perhaps, is a very simple name for it. API is communication, perhaps. One program using abstractions of another. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a program. I mean, you can consider like a kitchen, making requests to a chef. There's an API there involved. It's just simplifying communication, simplifying input and output expectations, perhaps. But like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be a REST service. So, yeah. I mean, an interesting one is a development team. If you have a properly set up system, you're going to have Jira. You create a task in Jira, developers take care of it. That is kind of an API going on there. There's what's the word? A certain format of input that goes in and a certain format of output that goes out depending on the input. But that's not necessarily API, is it? API is just the transfer of... It's an interesting one. Okay, I'm curious what yours is.
So I think an API, I mean, you got the acronym right. I think of an API as a defined way that computers speak to each other, or computer programs speak to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I just pulled up the Wikipedia page on the topic, and it contrasts an API to a user interface, which I think is a good analogy. A user interface is how computers interact with people, or vice versa, whereas an API is how computers or computer programs interact with each other.
But not necessarily. Like, for example, the Arduino bootloader has an API. That's the same. yeah, how would you call it in that sense? I mean, even microchips in themselves have APIs
That's
for
true.
the code running in them to communicate with
So
themselves.
that's a case of
So,
hardware talking to software, right?
yeah, okay, so yeah, also different layers of abstraction. Like you don't necessarily, although this is compiled stuff. So yeah, let's not mention that one. Let's just let's not leave people asking more questions than they came in.
So yeah. Anyway, I think the important point to make here, because I think the confusion most people make, those who do make confusion, is they think that an API means a web service. It means that I'm writing a service that talks to another service over the web, usually REST, but it could be SOAP or some other XML based web service. But I think the important thing is that API does not mean web service. A web service is an example of an API, but it's by no means the only one. And in fact, before the web existed, APIs existed. And often APIs are just the way you call a function. If you have a shared library, it has an API, and so that in fact that's how I learned about APIs. When I first learned of APIs, I thought of it as the set of functions in this shared library, and how they're used. And so the web concept actually came later. The youngsters don't realize that, but that came later.
I was going to suggest that because I mean libraries etc. They all have APIs and how to work with them. But I guess a lot of principles apply to design a good API. They apply to probably all APIs. So which is very similar to object-oriented programming in general.
I think you're right. I think a lot of the same concepts that come from things like good function names in object-oriented programming. You want good, depending on how your API is designed, you want good endpoint names or good function names, or the parameters you pass, they should be clearly named, and so on.
And I forget what the actual technical term for it is, but like it just needs to know as little as possible about each other.
Isolation of concerns, probably, or something along those lines.
Something like that, yeah. So that will apply. And I mean, I've heard people say that microservices is just object-oriented programming, but through a network.
In a sense, I mean, calling microservices just anything is a little bit dangerous. Yeah. But on principle, I think you're right.
It's very similar. It's just now you have latency to think about.
Yeah, and fault tolerance and 1,000 other things. Thus, it's not just anything, but
yeah,
point stands.
I hope my employers don't listen to this, but my philosophy with microservices is we'll implement it when I can hire somebody else to take care of it.
Yeah. Microservices are great for certain problems,
yes.
But a lot of people don't have those problems. So let's talk about done.
Yeah,
shall we define done?
That's a great one. I can put on my C-level hat for this one.
Okay.
And I have a good analogy I think you like. So
I'm ready. Hit me.
Yeah. So done. Again, this is a thing that it depends from team to team, company to company. But to me, done means when something is in production, working, and customers can interact with it. To me, that's what done means. But whenever somebody says done, I not question, but I look at who they are to see kind of what they mean. Because if you ask a mechanic, hey, is my engine done yet? They might say yes, and the engine might be done, but it might not be back in the car yet. It might still be on the shop floor,
Yeah.
And if an engineer tells me something is done, maybe the thing that is done is still not back in the car. But if a business person tells me done, the way I see it is it generating revenue for me yet? So, yeah, but it is good to have some sort of alignment here. And I do get the argument that like I sent my software off to QA, it's done. As far as I'm concerned, it's done. But it's not, because it could come back. For example, even when it's in production, it might not be done if it hasn't been going and working for a week. Mm-hmm. It might still come back and have some things that really need, let's say, critical bugs that affect its functionality. Because if you count minor bugs as something not being done, then things are never done. And then you start saying done twice. And if you have to say done twice, you know that your definition of done is wrong. I also said one time someone asked me if something was done, and I said it was pretty done.
Pretty done. Okay.
Pretty done, yeah.
So I mostly agree with you. I think, although I definitely think context matters, and
Yes.
specifically in the context of, say, a Kanban board or Jira or something like that. It is important to know when you can move that ticket from in progress to done, and that probably isn't the same as it's generating revenue and there are no bugs and customers are happy with it, because you probably don't know that until after it's been in front of customers for days or weeks or sometimes longer.
Yeah, but I think it's also this one. I think it's also part like especially management, depending on who they ask, because there's different people involved in different parts of something, and depending on who you ask, their part might be done.
Right.
QA might have already tested it. He might say it's done, but it might not have been deployed to production yet. Then it's not done in the sense that the person that is asking expects. So this is definitely something that internally everyone needs to agree on, and perhaps even create names for other things like your stages on your Kanban board in Jira or whatever other system you're using.
Yeah.
I mean, how many are there anyway? So
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
yeah,
I think that every team should define done to whatever degree is necessary on their team. Some teams maybe it's intuitive and they don't need a formal definition of, and that's fine if that works.
oh, that's I think that's very difficult.
I think it probably is, but I think maybe on certain small teams maybe it's okay if you have two people and you just kind of work it out or whatever. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're saying it's done except for, I think that's the time when you need to formalize what done means, because you're if you have to verbally provide your exceptions to your done state, then it's not actually done. And it would be really useful just for communication purposes to agree on what done actually means.
Yes, and this goes both ways. This is not just something a definition you can agree in, let's say, isolation from each other,
Right.
because it's also about the person that is asking. They also need to know what they're asking, because if they're just asking, "Is it done?" and they don't have the definition, then they don't know what they're asking.
That's
So
true. That's
yeah,
true. My wife and I have this problem almost every day when it comes to dinner time. She'll say dinner's, well, she says ready, which is the definition of ready is a whole other topic, right?
well,
But
that's
what she
something
means
else.
is done, which is also confusing if you're trying to apply Scrum
Well,
terms.
actually, maybe I prefer ready.
Yeah.
Maybe I prefer ready. Like, is the engine done? Yes. Is the car ready? No.
See, this is where these definitions are really useful, because in on most Scrum teams, definition of ready happens before you start the work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, okay. But like a dinner could be done, but it could still be like all. I mean, the oven hasn't been opened yet.
Right.
The pot is still closed. Dinner
And see,
is
that's what my
done.
wife means.
Not ready. Yeah. Maybe
Dinner's
there's
done to her means now it's
yeah,
time to come set the table and pull the food out of the oven. To me,
exactly.
dinner's done means I can sit down now and I can start serving my plate. So we have this conflict almost every day.
Yeah. So you also need some sort of internal document.
Yes, we need a wiki. If only we had Jira for our household runnings, we could just put it in
Yeah. If someone
Confluence.
actually considers doing that, they probably need therapy and a few months off.
All
Yeah.
right.
Shit. All where agile hurt you.
Have we done, or do we need to do more? Is it done except for something else?
We're done. We could do the hacker or hacking if that's
Yes. Oh,
relevant.
yeah. We missed that one.
How relevant it is.
A hacker or hacking. What is that? Because you hear this come up. In fact, recently I saw it on a social media conversation where somebody made some bold claim that hackers are evil, or I don't remember exactly what it was. Um, what do you think? Are hackers evil? And if so, or if not, explain your answer.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I even have a title of the art a title of an article which is complete bollocks, and I know it is. But GDPR rules, do they make hacking legal in a sense? Because if companies are required to give you your information on your request, you can do that with hacking. But things are not as easy to hack anymore. But I guess if you're a developer, you should know how to break your own stuff. And if you can break your own stuff, you can figure out how other things are done and know how to break other stuff. It's like it's perhaps quite software related, because it's reverse engineering stuff. My words don't come out properly today, but I mean, when I was first learning SQL, for example, I knew what I shouldn't do for it to not be vulnerable. That this doesn't really happen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started learning that, I started learning when other systems I was using were vulnerable. And of course, I played around with it a lot. I got a lot of interesting information. And I mean, at one point I got, I was able to display whatever page I wanted on a competitor's website. Just a search button. They had a search field. You could put in any URL. As long as before it had some quotes or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and it would display whatever was in that URL. So that's beautiful for phishing and stuff like that. Like, hey, your account doesn't work, etc. But that doesn't really matter. But also credit card information. Even when all the credit card payment suppliers tell you to not save data locally, which is why they tell you. And but hackers are not evil. Why? That doesn't make any sense. That's just a strange LinkedIn post just to attract attention.
So, do you have a definition for what you consider hacker or hacking to be?
Getting access to something you shouldn't have access to.
Okay. I have a broader definition of hacking than that, actually.
Okay.
What you described, I would describe as cracking.
Yeah, fair.
Which is gaining unauthorized access to something. And it could be someone's account. It could be breaking DRM on music on your iPod or rooting your phone or any of that sort of stuff is cracking.
Disassembling some software to bypass the if condition for the license.
Exactly. And now that is a form of hacking, but I think hacking is broader than that. I see hacking as, this is a very informal definition. I haven't looked it up, but this is just my concept of it. Playing with something to learn how it works or to see what you can do with it.
That with another definition, which is this is how a lot of people actually use it, especially in mainstream media and stuff, is using something for something it wasn't intended to be used for.
Sure.
Like this guy hacked gambling sites, or not gambling sites, but like this woman hacked Tinder.
Or life hacks, right?
Yeah,
use duct tape to wash your dishes or whatever magic you might come up with, right?
Yeah, that kid from TikTok already ruined those with his...
But I mean, I think of myself as a hacker. In fact, I think of my daily work, writing code, is largely hacking. I'm not trying to break into any systems. I'm just, okay, I need to solve this problem. How am I going to do it? I don't know. I'm going to try a bunch of different things and see what works and what can I do with this? And,
So the reverse engineering kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely reverse engineering, I would say, is hacking. Even if it's not software. Like if you're reverse engineering a piece of hardware or a lawnmower, you might even call that hacking if you want to.
Yeah, fair. I mean, a lot of maker spaces, a lot of people consider themselves hackers in those. Yeah. So,
So it sounds like even amongst ourselves, there's still some ambiguity here, and I think that's okay. But
even within ourselves.
Well, I didn't quite say that right, did I? Like, I didn't mean like within myself, but like between the two of us, there's still some ambiguity. Perhaps within ourselves as well. I don't know.
Even like there's, like I said, like this only really matters if the people that you work with agree on the same definition, because otherwise it doesn't really matter. Yeah. But this is an interesting topic because I mean, even if you go for like a society, people have to know what the words mean, and if people start changing the meaning of words, then you can't get anything done, because if you hear a certain word, you expect it to be a certain thing, but it turns out 5 years ago Merriam-Webster changed it to something slightly different, just enough to cause confusion. Yeah. So yeah, we can create a dysfunctional team, we can create a dysfunctional society.
I think you touched on a really good point though, which I think they call white hat versus black hat hacking, right?
Yeah.
So black hat, if I'm not mistaken, is the idea of breaking into something for nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
And white hat is generally the idea of breaking into something to demonstrate how it can be broken into so that you can fix those security holes. Although there might be other reasons, but
yeah, I mean, that's the reason Amazon pays out sometimes $20,000 for people to bring vulnerabilities to them.
Yeah.
I think $20,000 is still very little for some stuff, because if you could theoretically profit millions from it, $20,000 isn't going to cut it. Yeah. But I think they have I think for stuff like that, they would cut you a slightly different deal. So that's but I mean, even white hat hacking, like at one point I gained access to credit cards in some online store, and I sent an email saying, hey guys, you have this vulnerability and so and you should probably fix it. And but of course, like the reaction wasn't I expected it to be strange, because it's kind of like working for an alarm company and then writing a letter saying, hey, you weren't home, so I left that letter in your. I'm selling alarms. You weren't home, so I left this letter on your kitchen table. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you have this vulnerability, and here's all the credit cards for your customers and all the transactions since 2004. So it's a bit like, oh, are you scamming me? Or yeah, and then nothing changes. But there's definitely that, and then there's also the gray hat, which is if it's more profitable to be black hat, you go black hat. If it's more profitable to be white hat, you go white hat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Red Hat, but that's just a company owned by IBM and that sells Linux distributions. That's completely
and they're an amazing money making machine.
All right. Tell me what you think of the difference between an engineer and a developer.
I could think in different ways. This case, like if I'm a developer, I might think some things. If I'm an engineer, I might think other things. But without trying to act superior or anything, an engineer will actually engineer. It's also a verb. A developer might be someone that has a smaller scope in what they actually do. Like an engineer might engineer the system, which has a lot of just thinking going on. A developer might, engineer might write the Swagger documentation for some API. The developer will do it. But that you could also say that that's more of an architect. So it depends. Yeah. But engineers definitely have a broader scope in what they do. Developers code more, think less, because the thinking was already done for them. If you're a developer and you have to think a lot, perhaps you're an engineer.
I don't have a strong feeling on these terms. And you could also throw programmer in there if you wanted to, or even coder. You know, there's maybe different degrees of these things, but these terms are often used synonymously.
Yeah.
My thoughts on this, it's a very different angle than what you just said, and I don't disagree with what you said.
But it's also not strong in any means. It was just one of the ways I could think about it.
I could definitely see it working that way. My personal thought on it is that engineer is usually a bad metaphor for what we do in software. There are times when it maybe is appropriate, but and this kind of comes out of the software craftsmanship ideology, which I don't 100% buy into either. But they kind of make the point that engineering kind of implies a big project, like maybe a flight to the moon, for example. There were probably there was software engineering going on there in the sense that kind of this waterfall approach, a big design up front, you just decide all your requirements and your constraints and so on, and engineer the system, and then just have the little sort of peon coders build the stuff that you engineered. And so in that sense, in the truest, most complete sense, that's probably definitely software engineering. That and maybe those projects do still exist. Maybe they even should exist. I don't know, but I don't think that's what most of us are doing, except in maybe very small, very small scale.
Yeah. So you're saying like the more agile something is, the less engineering is going on.
Kind of, sort of. I mean, engineering is still happening, but it happens in a different way.
Yeah, because I mean, like, let's say a bridge, a lot of stuff is a given, like gravity, the amount of weight that's going to drive through it. A lot of things are a given, but with software, nothing really is a given. So less engineering has to go on, and it's more of a hacking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I mean, there are definitely people who make the claim that agile software development fails because it doesn't believe in engineering, or specifically XP, because it doesn't believe in this sort of engineering approach. I'm not actually sure that I agree with that. I'm looking up something quickly.
I can see the logic behind it.
The thing is that agile software practices, and XP in particular, do engineering. They just do it in a different way. I did a recent episode with J.B. Rainsberger where he talked about evolutionary design, which I don't think we use the term engineering in that conversation. But I think it's the same sort of thing. I mean, it's the idea that you can build a design or engineer a design piece by piece as you need it, rather than doing it all at once. So in that sense, it still is engineering. It's just It's a different kind of engineering. And if you want to use analogies, and I think this is why the software craftsmanship group say engineering is a bad analogy, because it doesn't really feel like it fits here. It feels more like a gardening activity or painting a masterpiece, or it's more of a step-by-step iterative feel your way through the system rather than a big engineering effort up front. So does that mean that I think that software engineer is a bad title? Not necessarily. I think it's mainly synonymous with software developer or programmer. But I guess, all analogies are limited. That's why they're called analogies and not the thing. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts. I don't have a strong conclusion about that.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Like, yeah, you could say that less premeditated planning is less engineering in a sense. But I'm just opening up the Wikipedia page. And the term engineering is derived from the Latin ingenium, meaning cleverness, and ingeniare, which means to contrive or devise.
Okay.
Devise.
Well, we definitely do those things even in Agile iterative development,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But also, like, engineering, like the word engineer is not everyone can have that title everywhere.
Right.
For example, in Portugal, you cannot be an engineer if you don't have a master's or might be a bachelor's. But Portugal is strange because people with just a bachelor's are also sometimes called doctor. So
I think the same is true in Canada, that you have to have a master's or something to be considered an engineer.
So it's a protected title, and that's maybe why the word developer and coder and stuff like that's popped up, because there's a lot of people. I don't know if a lot is the right word, but there's a substantial number of people in this field that don't have degrees.
Well, I certainly think that the term or the title, the job title engineer, has become devalued, at least in America, the United States, where I lived most of my life. You would have engineer tacked onto anything, customer support specialist engineer or sales engineer or whatever. You're just a salesperson, So you just kind of tack on engineer to make you look more impressive without changing the job description at all. So
yeah, I've had a WordPress engineer.
Yeah. And we all know WordPress wasn't engineered, right?
Oof. Although I don't dislike WordPress. I don't dislike Automatic. They're cool. You know that everyone who starts, regardless of their title, starts off with 2 weeks of customer support.
Okay. I guess I won't be working there.
That's exactly, they want to weed you out.
Yeah, well, they did. I wouldn't have worked there anyway. I don't want to work in PHP, but
yeah, sure, yeah.
So they weeded me out in several different fronts.
Yeah, PHP is a
no disrespect for those who like PHP. I just don't like it, and it's okay that you don't like the things I like too. So
Yeah, I mean, there's ways to make it less sucky, but of course, if you're coming from Go, there's no reason whatsoever why you do PHP, unless you're getting paid 120 euros an hour for it. Then yeah,
I guess that might help.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, well, all right then. So
shall we call this an episode? I think we've tackled some hairy definitions. We've come to a few conclusions.
So. We did the DevOps definition, but we didn't define what is a big DevOps and what is a tiny DevOps.
Okay.
That might be an interesting one.
So the way I look at it is that most of the DevOps literature out there, and I don't just mean written words, I also mean YouTube presentations or your conference talks and all this stuff. Most of it's about the big companies, FANG, that comes from Google and Netflix. In fact, the 10 plus deploys a day, I think that was from Netflix, but it's Netflix, Google, Amazon, Spotify. These companies are the ones that are making all the big splashes, and that's great. I love it. I like listening to their success stories. I like to hear how they were able to handle 15 billion requests per second or expand to 10,000 Kubernetes nodes or whatever, all these technical challenges. It's fun. The same way I like to listen to the stories of how they landed on the moon and that stuff. But most of us are never going to do those things. Most of us won't land on the moon or deploy 10,000 node Kubernetes clusters. And even if we do, that probably won't be our only job. Most of us work in small companies, small to medium-sized companies, or we will at some point in our careers. And those companies face a certain type of challenges that the big companies usually don't. They usually have lower budgets. They have fewer people on staff. They have fewer seniors on staff, and so they need to solve these problems, the same sorts of DevOps problems, the cooperation and collaboration problems, but they don't have these deep pockets and huge data centers and all the fancy things that the big players have. So that's what Tiny DevOps is. It's focusing on the smaller companies that have to solve the same sorts of problems.
Yeah. So basically, the smaller problem, well, not smaller problems, but tiny refers more to the company than the DevOps itself,
Right.
because yeah.
So I target my consultancy and this channel also. I try to keep the topics relevant to people that are trying to do DevOps in on a team of 1 to 20, 25 people.
Yeah.
I think there will still be a lot of relevance to people on larger teams, but if you have a problem that's specific to a 50-person or 1,000-person team, it's not for this channel.
Yeah, fair.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. It was fun talking about definitions. It's fun to see you again. Let's do it again. I'd love to have you back on the show for some more definitions or another catch up at a later time.
Yeah, for sure. My English wasn't great today because I was just thinking in Norwegian all the time. But yeah.
Well, I'm sure your English was better than my Norwegian would have been.
I don't know. I mean, do you speak any Dutch?
Not really.
Being in the Netherlands?
Not really. So very little. Okay. Yeah, I could read a menu.
Because if you know Dutch, Norwegian is quite easy.
I did notice that when I was in Norway, that the signs looked almost like somebody misspelled Dutch.
Yeah, basically, just like Dutch looks like misspelled English, so it's just a few misspellings away from.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So, yeah. Well, thanks so much. We'll see you all next time. Hope you tune in again later.